In this video, I will be answering your questions about mental health, poetry, writing, and book publishing. If you have any other questions that I don't bring up in this video, or any other questions about any topics at all, you can leave them in my comment section and I'll make a video about them. So the first two questions are about mental health, and they kind of go hand in hand. The first question is by Mario, and it says, what do you do when you feel like you're in a dark place and you really can't get out of it? And the second one is by Hunter of Artemis, and it says, how do I make myself happier? So there are a number of things that I do to try to put myself in a more positive mood. One of those things is forcing myself to be productive. And along with that, trying new hobbies and new things that are productive. So maybe that looks like writing poetry, reading, practicing any form of art, trying a new form of art. Maybe that looks like recording, it might sound funny because a lot of people start having mental health issues and start struggling because they are on social media and they let the comments get to them or whatever. Not let the comments get to them, but like the comments do get to them or whatever. I don't know how to phrase that. But me personally, I love recording and I love posting, and I don't really care about the comments, to be honest. The negative comments. I love the positive comments, but like the hate or whatever, not that I get a whole lot, but I don't really care. It doesn't really affect me too much. And so this is one thing that's made myself a lot happier. If you're someone the comments will affect, maybe you shouldn't do that. Like, I don't know. Another thing is being productive as soon as you get up. So obviously if you're in school or you have something like you have to wake up for, like, especially if it's something you don't want to do like that, you can't do this step, but maybe on weekends or summer if you don't have school or anything like that, being productive as soon as you get up. So usually I might take a little break after I wake up. Not that that's like something taxing to do, but I'll kind of like chill and calm myself down. Maybe I'll just lay there. Maybe I will watch an episode of something or scroll through TikTok. And so I'll have that like unproductive time to kind of like calm myself down and distract myself for a little bit and get it out of my system. And then I will try to wake up and be productive. So one thing that helps with this is I have a list of reminders. I set reminders in my phone that go off at set times. And they help a lot with keeping myself on track. And so if I have like schoolwork or assignments I need to do that day, then I'll set them, for whatever time. If I have some things I want to do as far as hobbies or more fun, productive things, maybe that's like I want to write some poetry for my next book, or I want to do some art. I found something that I want to sketch, and so maybe it's that. I'll put that in my reminders to kind of remember, like, hey, maybe you should be a little bit productive today. Another thing that helps is just like, I don't know if you're like everything shower type of girly, but like long showers, doing a lengthy skincare routine, self-care, that type of thing is something, especially at night, it's something that kind of like winds me down and calms me down, and it puts me in a better mood for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe it won't put you in a better mood, but it just kind of feels good and it gives my brain positive vibes, I guess. I don't know. But ultimately, sometimes, the stuff like that doesn't work. And, sometimes you just have to like distract yourself. Like, I know this isn't something that people would recommend, but just scrolling through social media and watching episodes, like, I mean, is it a positive thing to do whenever you're in that mindset? Probably not. But it was something that I did a lot whenever I was younger that kind of just distracted myself from everything, I guess. And it kind of gave me an escape of sorts. And reading did the same for me. I don't know if you're a reader, but if you are, reading helped me as well. It kind of gave me like an escape. And so doing something like that and just kind of like surviving it is something that might be necessary too. But ultimately, if you genuinely need help, like, I definitely recommend going to a doctor, seeing a therapist, getting put on medication if that's something that you need, because ultimately, there are a lot of things that you can do to help promote yourself to be a little bit better mentally and improve your mental state. But if you are genuinely suffering, especially long term, or due to some event, like from a mental health issue, like, you need to get help. Like, I very much procrastinated getting help for a very, very, very long time. And, you know, I promote getting help, but I've never tried therapy or anything, just being so for real. But after getting help, it did so much for me. Like, it genuinely improved so much. And like, I'm not very exposed to stressors right now, so that could be a contributing factor, but genuinely getting help if you need it is going to help more than any simple step. But you know, if you can't get help right now, maybe it's finances, maybe it's because you're young and it's a whole issue, you know, with parents. Regardless, you know, there are some things that you can do. And so the things I listed you can do, you can search up other things to do to kind of put yourself in a better mental state. But ultimately, sometimes distracting yourself and just kind of sticking it out is the best thing that you can do. So the second question, or the third question, I guess, the next question is by Layla T. And it says, do you have any tips for writer's block or how to get back into writing after a long time? So I think I answer a question in detail later on in this video, or I will answer a question about writer's block. But the first thing I do whenever I have a writer's block is don't pressure yourself. I don't stress about it. Like, if you pressure yourself and you're like, I need to get this done, I need to write again, it's just gonna make it worse. Not pressuring yourself and like not thinking about it too much and not stressing over it is something that helps you. Another thing is, whenever you do start writing, don't think about it and just write. I know that sounds, you know, hard to do or like kind of obvious to the point where it shouldn't even be advice, but a lot of times writer's block can come from you being like, oh, you know, I have some ideas, but they're not good ideas. I can't think of anything good right now. Write the bad ones down. Like, if anything at all comes to your brain, write it down. It's better to write a horrible poem than not be able to write anything at all because you're limiting yourself to only the best ideas. So sometimes, especially when you're having writer's block, you do just need to write a bad poem, and then altering it and fixing it is one way that maybe you could get over your writer's block. Some places that I find inspiration, which I also talk more in depth about later, is Pinterest, journaling, mental health, struggles or different annoyances in my life, processing events, issues, relationships, all those type of things. A lot of the poetry that I write is negative, like, let's just be for real. But I was about to say that some poetry, I think I've written a few positive poems. I'm trying to do better with that in my next book, to write more positive poetry. But anything at all that kind of makes me feel a certain way, or either it stresses me out or it annoys me or whatever, I kind of write about it. I write a lot about, you know, different things that I have been through, different things I feel, and also society and how I think that it's stupid. Everything about it is stupid. So I write about that a little bit. But regardless, I just use it as a release. And so anything that's trapped in my head and I just want to get out, I get out. And another thing that contributes to that is also, like, I'm someone who doesn't really talk about stuff IRL. So, like, poetry is my way of, like, getting all the things in my brain out. Maybe that is mental health. Maybe it is the annoyances or the stressors in my life. Or maybe it's something more positive, you know, it's something that I feel passionate about. Like, maybe it's a type of opinion of sorts, but not like anything that's like controversial to the point of like causing a ton of argument, or like saying in my poems that like I'm right and you're wrong. Like, I don't really like that type of stuff. But anything like that I just want to tell somebody or get off my chest, I write a poem about, because that's how I get it out in my life. I don't know. So this next question is by River, and it says, when did you get into the hobby of writing poetry and why? Also, this is random, but I have allergies right now, and so if my voice sounds like scratchy or I'm like stuffy, like, just ignore it. No, I'm not. So when did you get into the hobby of writing poetry and why? So I kind of touched on this, but I do struggle a lot with my mental health. Like, let's just be for real. I am someone who is kind of born with a little bit of it, and then a little bit of it developed over time. And, you know, it's always been a factor in my life, I guess you could say. And so I started journaling pretty early. Not very, very early. I journaled a little bit whenever I was a kid, but mostly whenever I say that, I'm talking about like teen years. So like starting at like 12 or 13 and then pushing on. And so I journaled a lot just because I needed a release. And then I eventually discovered Whitney Hansen. I don't know if you know her. She's amazing. She writes poetry books, or she writes poetry and publishes books. But regardless, I found her. Oh my lord, that was a voice crack. I found her and I loved her poetry, and I related to some of it a lot. And I was like, you know, not only is reading her poetry helping me, but maybe writing some of my own. You know, I'd relate to every single one of the poems I write. And so I kind of got into writing poetry to kind of release all of the things in my head. I don't know if this is causing a reflection on my face or not, but I need to stop messing with that. But I started it very much to kind of release my everything trapped in my head, my mental health issues, you know, the things I was struggling with, whatever. And so I started writing poetry at about 13, but the first poems in my book that I actually seriously started writing poetry, you know, is more 14. So about 13, 14 is whenever I started. And then I ended up self-publishing my first book at 17. And after that, I just, you know, continued. So yeah, I continue to write poetry about mental health and emotions and thoughts and events and struggles type of deal. I'm trying to venture off to more maybe positive poems, more types of topics and styles. But, you know, right now that's just the reality. Like, let's just be for real. I've published 2 books and both of them are incredibly depressing. I need to stop messing with that, my lord. So this is kind of a similar question, but this one's by God's Mastercraft. And it says, what does poetry mean to you, and when did you realize why it meant so much to you? So honestly, if I could explain writing poetry to you and what it means to me, I would just explain it as a breath of fresh air. Like, it's just so relieving. It gets so much off my chest and out of my head. You know, like I said before, it's kind of like the only place that I get it out of my head. So it's very, very like calming and a release for me. So, you know, I started writing poetry at 13 about mental health. But one thing that has helped me and why it means so much to me, and when I realized it meant so much to me, is it's helped me to understand myself a lot. Whenever I was first writing poetry, just to preface, I think that's the right word, I've always been interested in mental health issues. Even when I was like pretty young, they've always like fascinated me, like psychology, mental health. I've always done research on it, which I think is just very great foreshadowing personally. But regardless, and so kind of writing down what I was feeling, what I was thinking, and, you know, I'm someone who doesn't really know what I'm feeling until it's on paper, so it kind of helped me understand myself and kind of understand what I was going through and the struggles that I was having. And so, yeah, it kind of helped me not only understand what was going in my head, but also it led me to become a lot more self-aware and emotionally mature, which, you know, also that just has to do with, you know, getting older, and also, I'm someone who believes that age has nothing to do with maturity and that you mature through your experiences. And so, having mental health issues since you're young is either going to make you very, very mature or very, very struggled and not emotionally mature. I don't know how to phrase that. But regardless, I was on the top category. So yeah, poetry to me is just like very calming, and I realized that it helped me a lot and helped me kind of discover who I was and what I was going through. So that's why it means a lot to me. So now we have another question by Layla T. And this one says, how did you get the idea and process of publishing and writing a book? So whenever I started writing poetry, I've always been one to type the poems in my notes app on my phone, right? I've talked about that in, I think it was my last long form video, the previous one I just posted last week. And I write it in my notes app in a notes folder called Poem Factory, because I feel like that's fitting. And then I put it into Google Docs, and whenever I put it into Google Docs, I put it into book form. I'm the kid who wanted to be an author, wanted to be a writer ever since she was young. And so whenever I would write, and also I've been writing since I was a kid. I just started writing poetry at 13, but I used to write books and stories and that type of thing ever since I was real, real young. And I've put them in Google Docs a lot. And so even now I write stories for just funsies. I don't really plan on ever publishing them, but I write them for fun. It's another one of my hobbies. And so whenever I was writing poetry, it just made sense and it was just natural for me to write it in book form. And then, like I said, I discovered Whitney Hansen, and she used to have this podcast up. I don't think it's up anymore. There was 1 or 2 episodes that she put on Spotify. I don't think that they're available anymore. And one of the episodes kind of talked about her backstory in a way. One thing from that podcast that really stuck with me was how she was born in a small town. And, a lot of the people that are big, I don't know, they live in big city, they're already up there in a way. But her saying that she was just from a small town and started writing poetry because she also wanted to cope with some issues in her life, it resonated with me a lot, I guess. And it kind of put in my head, oh, maybe I can publish a poetry book. If she's from a small town and she's just in a similar situation as me, maybe I could do it too. And so that helped me a lot, and that kind of developed my, not really the idea, but more so motivation to do it, because I've always wanted to publish books. I've always wanted to write, but I never thought that it would be attainable and achievable. But hearing, stuff about her, it helped me a lot. And somehow, I don't remember, I think I might have mentioned wanting to publish a book to my dad. Maybe he's the one who found it. Maybe I found it. I think that he found it, but I don't know. Found out about Amazon KDP and how you can self-publish your own books. So I didn't really want to go through a publisher, to be honest. I just didn't want to hassle with it. I feel like it's good for a lot of people, especially I think that it might market your stuff for you, it takes a lot of the process away from you. But personally, I just liked publishing it myself, being in control of all of the factors as far as book cover and everything that was in it and all that kind of stuff. So I self-published through Amazon, and I did it at 17. You can do it below the age of 18 with the help of an adult as being the publisher and kind of doing it for you, helping you because you're not 18 yet. But yeah, so that's kind of how I discovered it and how I went about publishing it. So yeah, if you want me to explain a little bit more about Amazon KDP or the publishing process in a different video, I can, but essentially you just search up Amazon KDP, make an account, and then it's pretty much a step forward process. You just kind of like create a book and then you put all the information in, and it can be a little bit of a hassle getting the book manuscript and the book cover and stuff in and correctly done, and then you just publish it. So the next question is by I'm Only Alice, and it says, how do I get through a writer's block on poetry because I need to write and I can't find the right words? So I kind of mentioned this, in the beginning of this video, but again, one thing that I do, the first thing that I do is I take a break and I don't pressure myself to write. In this question, it says, I just had a brain fart. In this question, it says, because I need to write. I don't know if, it's more of a want or if you really have something that you genuinely need to write for. But regardless, if you pressure yourself, it's just going to make it harder. So kind of releasing that pressure and releasing that stress off of you is something that will help you write quicker. And so first thing I do is don't pressure myself. And then honestly, I read a little bit. I replace writing with reading for a little bit. Maybe I do read poetry. I have a ton of poetry books just because I like poetry. There's poetry online. If you go into Pinterest, there's a ton of poems. And honestly, I like a lot of kind of older poets that are kind of more modernized than, people usually did back then, such as I don't know how to say their names correctly, but Franz Kafka, Charles Bukowski, I don't know. Also Mary Oliver. There's a lot of different poets and poems on Pinterest, and maybe reading that, maybe reading non-poetry books. Regardless of if you read poetry or not, reading in general kind of just helps my creative brain to get rejuvenated in a sense. I don't know. And then the next thing I would do is just write something. A lot of times, like I said previously, whenever you do have writer's block, it's because you won't write the bad things down. You have some ideas, but you don't have good ideas. And so you're like, if I don't have good ideas, I'm not going to write it at all. Sometimes you just need to write the bad ideas, write the bad poem. Writing a bad poem is better than writing no poem at all. And so also keep in mind, whenever you write poetry, the first copy is not the final copy. You can write a horrible poem and then change it and alter bits of it to turn it into the best poem you've ever written. It doesn't matter. So if a poem's bad, unless you just hate the concept altogether and want to scrap it and write about a new topic, then that's a different thing. But if it's just because you don't like how you wrote it or you don't like aspects of it, change it. It doesn't have to be a bad poem. And so that's another thing, getting through writer's block. It's also getting through that barrier of oh, I can't write a bad poem. Yes, you can. You can change it later. It's fine. And then eventually, through doing those steps, I would get a good idea and be able to pass the writer's block. So, maybe you write a horrible poem, and from that horrible poem, you get a great idea, and you either alter it or you do write a new thing, and it ends up being the best poem you've ever written. So yeah, don't pressure yourself, but these are some steps that you can take. Maybe you can research some other steps that other people take. But yeah, I hope you get over your writer's block, because honestly, I am currently in writer's block right now, but I'm at the point where it's I have a lot going on as far as I just started online school and stuff like that, and so I'm maybe I just don't write poetry for now. I have a ton of ideas, but no motivation to write them. So we're currently in the process of just not pressuring ourselves, and eventually I will get the motivation in a few days and I will be able to write it. The last question that we have to read out today is by Dawn Huntress on DA. And it says, what are some topics to write poetry about? I can't think of any at the moment. So, like I said before, I generally write my poems about mental health, struggles I'm having, experiences I'm going through, things that are going on around me in my life, things that are going on in my head, beliefs, altering ideas, thoughts, that type of thing. Like I said, I don't really have an avenue that I've chosen to get it out in person. And so writing it down in poetry is kind of just like getting it out and releasing it from my head. And so like that's the topics that I usually do my poems about. But if I don't have anything like that to give me ideas, maybe I'm going through a very bland part of my life, you know, no good things happening, no bad things happening vibe, you know, just like flat. Then I do have this journal that I've started keeping. I have talked about it in one of my previous long form YouTube videos, but it is adorable. I got it in Alaska when I was on vacation there this summer, and in it I have started like writing poetry. And I'm trying to write, because, you know, fitting the cover, I want to write more like nature-y ones. My sister writes a lot of nature poems, and I love them. I absolutely adore them. I love her poetry, and so I kind of want to venture into nature. I like reading about the metaphors using nature, and so, you know, I like reading it. Why don't I write it? And so I've done a lot more nature. I'm trying to do one that are kind of giving positive vibes. I did one about like making eye contact with like a baby fawn, and I used it as a metaphor for like losing innocence as you get older, and wishing that the younger you never lost her innocence and never got the maturity that she wished for, kind of deal. And that's not exactly the most positive poem, but it's not exactly negative either. So yeah, I'm counting it. But regardless, I have in this, getting back on topic, something that I've previously talked about called The Art of Noticing. And it's just a little list of things that I write down. So one thing, I'm in love with cats, right? Cats are my everything. And so one thing that I've written down is the sound cats' ears make as they shake their heads. So like, you know, whenever cats like shake their heads, like their ears kind of tap sometimes, especially like my younger cat has big ears. So his tap whenever he shakes his head, and I love it so much. But then there's other stuff like the bed of snow in between the mountain peaks, the bald eagle flying freely among the trees, the many different languages being spoken. How the dark teal water looks when rain hits it. It's just a bunch of different things that are kind of like aesthetic that I can write about. In the previous video I just posted last week, I used one of these. I used, oh Lord, where was it? The old lady walking her unleashed dog, waving at those who passed by. I used that, and I showed you my poetry process. So maybe if you are having writer's block, or maybe if you need a new thing to write poetry about, you can look at that video. Sorry, I don't know if you just saw my knee there, but you can look at that video and kind of get my poetry process and see how I use these little things that I noticed throughout the days to write poems. So yeah, that was me answering a lot of poetry questions and questions about mental health and book publishing. If you have any other questions, like I think I said in the beginning of the video, put them in the comments. If you have any complete video topic ideas, something like the previous video, you know, I showed you my writing process and I walked you through the steps that I take. If you have something like that that will take a long time, that's not just a simple question and answer, I can do a video about that. You can specify, you know, maybe that you want a long form video about it, or, you know, you can just leave a random question in the comments. If it's about mental health, confidence, poetry, writing, book publishing, anything around that area, I will be happy to answer them and make another part to this Q&A. I think this is part 2, and the next video, if you have any questions for me, would be part 3. So yes, before I go, I want to bless you with this little guy. He probably won't stay for long. He already wants to escape, but he's adorable. And he's in some of my, if you watch my short videos, he's in them. a lot because he is a very distracting kitten. So yeah, if you have any other questions, you can leave them in the comments and I'll make another video about them. But thank you so much for watching and I hope you have an amazing day.